Hello, 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 welcome. Thanks again for coming. I have so much to share with you all this week. Okay, so I'm Kelly Vaughn. I'm from KnitSwag, and we're going to be talking again about my favorite knitting book, Number Knitting by Virginia Woods Bellamy. So I've been doing some research about this, like I do, and I have uncovered so much great stuff this week, and it's incredible. So for those of you who don't know, Number Knitting is the original modular knitting book. It was based on a patented method that she got patented in 48. This is the design on her patent application. This is called Lambs and Butterflies, and it's amazing. It's available on Google Patents, and she did a series of articles for Women's Home Companion, and then McCall's Needlework in the starting in the 30s, going through the 40s, and then she published a book in 52. So what I've been trying to do is kind of like peel back the layers and figure out like what the timeline is of Virginia's life, because you know we have the book. We love the book. It's amazing. Like all the other modular knitting books out there are built upon this foundation. So we love the book, and we've been going through the patterns in the book. I've redrawn all the charts. I've knit more than half the patterns in the book. It's phenomenal. But what I want to know is I want to know about Virginia the person, and kind of like where she fits into the knitting world, but also like what her life was like back then, and just like I've been doing all kinds of research figuring out like what her timeline was, and so I'm going to share some of that with you today, and it is so interesting. Okay, so where did Virginia live? If you have a copy of the book, or if you're one of the lucky few that has a copy of the physical book, there was only 5,000 printed, and there's like, I double checked the WorldCat. I think there's only 5 of these available to check out of libraries in circulation, because most of them, I went through all of the libraries listed in WorldCat recently, and like, I don't know, 35 of them are private libraries or university libraries, and there's like a few public libraries, but like it's in their special collections. You're not even allowed to take it off of the premises, which is wild. So if you have a copy of this, consider yourself very, very lucky. If you don't have a physical copy of the book, let me show you. A number of years ago, I decided to digitize the whole thing for like my own benefit. And then a few years later, I decided, I just need to make this available for people to like, have access to, because there's so few of these books out there. And, so I digitized it. I redrew all the charts, I added bookmarks, hyperlinks. I made it like all cross-referenced. So anyway, in the introduction, let me see where the introduction is. Introduction is just a few pages down, and she talks about what is number knitting, and I have a whole video where I read that in its entirety. But what's interesting is that she references a lot of the town people that, like the test knitters and her friends. She does that over and over and over again, and we've talked about that kind of at length here, and we're learning who some of those people are, which is super fun. And she mentions here about the one of her, I think it was even this the Lambs and Butterflies. She had it exhibited at the Lanier exhibition barn at Lanier in Eliot, Maine. And so I've been wondering, like, where is that? Like, what is the Lanier exhibition barn? And I've been doing some digging, and it led me to some really interesting. It led me down some really cool rabbit holes. Okay, so the first one The first one. So let me show you. Let me show you how small of a place that she lived. So this is Google Maps, Google Earth, I guess, and we know from the correspondence. We know from some of the magazine articles, I think it was in Hand Weaver and Craftsman, she advertised her correspondence course, and the address listed that you're supposed to write to is River Road in Eliot, Maine. And we learned last week that predated zip codes, and apparently, at least where she lived, it predated house numbers. So I was like, how would they possibly find out where her house is? Well, I checked the census records and on Wikipedia. So I think it was in 1940, there was like 1,400 people in town, and the mailman's name was Douglas Maynard, right? So he delivered mail to everybody. By 1950, the population of town had shot up 32%. And so it was really, really growing during the decade that she moved there. So River Road is a whopping 2.9 miles long. And I don't know, I would imagine it would have been the same length at that time, but somewhere on River Road is where she lived. So it's a pretty small stretch of land to work with. Then she had mentioned, I did some research into Eliot, what in the world was Eliot Exhibition Barn? And there was this family called the Lanier family, and she mentions them throughout the book in different places. I think she even has a whole one of her designs. It was called the Lanier Circlet, and it was dedicated to the woman that owned this property. And the woman who owned this property was a good friend of hers, and for decades had run this children's camp. The city people, just people do today. The city people send their kids out to the children's camp for the summer, and they play games and learn how to do handcrafts, and they swim in the water, and they had swimming safety and boating safety and camping, and it was a children's camp, and it ran for decades. Well, I found out that it closed in 1940, and Virginia moved to town in 1945, and so there was I think it was Lanier, the woman, I forget her name, but she and her son ran it together, but that had shut down by the time that Virginia got there. But the barn was still there. The exhibition barn was still there. And you know what? The exhibition barn is still there. So on this article from this is the Eliot Historical Society, and they have a whole article all about the Lanier campgrounds. And what children did there and how much fun they had. And so I looked it up. So this is the exhibition barn from Google Earth. That's where Virginia did her lessons. She taught classes there. She had the Lambs of Butterfly blanket exhibited there, and somebody still lives in this house. They've restored it. Which is super exciting. So that's where she did her some of her work, which is, gosh, I love that. I love that so much. Hey, Nita, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. And if you're new here, because we always get some new people, I think. But if you haven't introduced yourself, we love new people because we're a small but very passionate group of knitters here. So we are really happy that you're here. Okay, so that's where Virginia, that was a little bit about Eliot, Maine, and Lanier. But I thought because I've been trying to figure out where on River Road did she live, because there were some houses there that were that are still there, that are occupied, that were built in the 1870s. And I came across something today that I had never noticed before. She says there was a Lanier Inn, which I need to do some research, but check this out. This is wild. So this is at the end of the introduction. So here at last is the book begun in a friend's house on the Atlantic Ocean, continued in my home at Lanier overlooking the Piscataqua River in Eliot, and now finished in a house above Blue Hill Falls. So somewhere on that Lanier property, she lived. I'm pretty sure. And I don't know like how big the property was back in the, the 40s, like the 30s, 40s, 50s, like, cause she moved in at 45. So I don't know like how big the property was back then. I would imagine it was still pretty big, because just a few years later, Mrs. Lanier had like shut down the campground and like was still living there because she was friends with Virginia. So anyway, I found out that the Eliot Historical Society has monthly Zoom meetings to talk about Eliot, Maine history. So guess what's on my calendar? Oh man, they probably don't get too many visitors from out of state very often. Super interested in their town, but I'm excited. Okay, so while I was doing all this research on like where Virginia lived, I wanted to find out like when did she move there, and like what precipitated her moving there, like what her life was like before and like what was it like after. And just like I want to know about her as a person, because like we have her designs. This is incredible. And there are a few articles, I don't know, maybe like 3 or 4 out there that interviewed, I think, Virginia's daughter Jane, who for years I didn't even know existed. So they interviewed Virginia's daughter Jane, and so there's like these anecdotal stories of some details in her life. And so those are all great. And I will post a link to those in the show notes, because I forgot to put them up in advance. Hey, Mishi B and Maz, welcome. Okay, so here's what I was able to track down, and part of the reason I was able to track this down, I have this whole I've been doing all kinds of archival research, and at one point I had reached out to both the Eliot Historical Society and the Maine Historical Society, and I think it was the Maine Historical Society. Maybe it was Eliot. They have a subscription, a newspaper.com subscription, and so they did a search, and they sent me, of Virginia Woods Bellamy, they sent me screenshots of like all of the magazine articles and newspaper articles that she was in. I think, yeah, just the newspaper articles. And so I've got ones from the of course, now I can't find them, but like there's a bunch of magazine articles like the Yankee, Handweaver and Craftsman, Pathfinder magazine. Oh, here it is. Newspaper articles. El Paso Times, Freeport Journal, the Baltimore Sun, the Bangor Daily News, the Jackson Sun, and the Jackson Herald, and the Portsmouth Herald. And they cover a span of like, most of them are like, 1949 to 1953, kind of like in the time frame that she was getting her patent, getting the book published. But there was one from 76 that it's like her obituary. And so based on all of the details in all the magazine articles and the newspaper clippings, I've been able to like piece together a timeline of like her life. And I'm still hoping to like fill in a lot more details, but here it is. Here's what I got so far. So in 1890, she was born in Providence, Rhode Island. Now, one of her friends, there's one of the documents that I have that says she might have been born in Baltimore, which, it possibly, because, the Baltimore Sun wrote I think that was where her obituary was published. But anyway, I'm pretty sure she was born in Providence, because there's an article by Virginia, like in a newspaper magazine or something, and she is giving like detailed family things, like what her kids are doing now, and like where she lives and where she was born. And so I think that's why she was born in Providence, because it wasn't hearsay. It was like her words. Okay, so I don't have really any information like from 1890 to 1925. I was able to track down that in 1925 she divorced her first husband. Like, I don't know when they got married. I do know they had one son together, but so 1925 she divorced the first husband. I think that was right around the time that she got tuberculosis and was like put in the sanatorium. And so what they, with COVID, we're familiar with this idea, like you have to isolate, stay 6 feet apart. But like when people had tuberculosis back in the 20s, they would like ship them off to a dedicated facility, and they could, like, for, I don't know, weeks, months, I'm not sure how long, but like she was isolated from everybody. And I think her son had just died, and divorce, something like that. So there was all this time that she was having a hard time with life. And so 25, got a divorce. 1926, she married her second husband, Francis Rufus Bellamy. Hey, Maura and Karen, welcome. Okay, so Francis Rufus Bellamy I have record of him in like 1917 and 1918. He was like a journalist, I think, for the Red Cross, like in Europe. And so he was a writer and an editor in his early years, because he was born, I think he was like 4 years older than Virginia. So in his early years, he was like, traveling the world, writing. And she married him in 26. And in 1928, their son Rufus was born. And in 1931, Jane was born. And I misspoke. I don't remember exactly when Virginia's first son died, but I think it was after she had the other two. And so for a while, she had the three. But then one of the oldest son died. Oh yeah, here it is in my notes. Okay, 1932, her first son from her first marriage contracted polio and died, which is horrific. So that was when she, I think, also was in the tuberculosis sanatorium and was very depressed. Yeah. Okay, in 1934, back up. So her husband, at this point in time, in the 20s, he was an editor. So he worked for a while with the Red Cross, and then he was like some sort of editor for a magazine called The Outlook. And I have found a whopping 2 records, like in the archive.org website, 2 of these things, and they're like from 1901. But this was a pretty big magazine, and it ran for, I don't know, like 40 years or something. And he was the editor. And through all of my digging around today, I found somewhere it said that Virginia had published 250 stories in the Outlook. 250. That's huge. I don't know where we go to find archival copies of the Outlook. That's on my list of things to do now. Okay, so her husband was one of the editors, which, it kind of makes sense. Like, if the wife is a good writer and you're the editor, like, well, sure, publisher. Hey, Bob. So also in the so they're living in New York. I think that the Outlook was headquartered in New York. I'm not entirely sure, but also in the 20s, 30s, her husband Rufus worked. He was an editor in some sort, maybe even the executive editor of the New Yorker magazine, which I think was a pretty big deal. And I had seen that because it's still in existence. Like most of these old publications, they're like long gone out of business. But like I tried to look up Virginia's poems on the New Yorker, and they're still under copyright. Like I have to get a subscription to the magazine to see her old poetry. But the great thing is they're still in business. And so they're still going to have all those archives. So I might be getting a subscription to the New Yorker. I'll probably start with getting the book of poetry that was published right by her, one of her good friends, like right after she passed. Maybe I'll start there. But anyway, so the publications that her husband was the editor for were typically the ones that published her work, which is great. But it does make sense, like why she got so much stuff published. And I haven't done any research into like where, like how many other, prolific female poets and writers there were back then. But she was very, very connected in like the literary circles. And there's some other number knitting like researcher types that have, there's only a few of them, but there's two in particular that when I think they're Anne Bratton and Susan Strawn. They're a couple of like PhD researcher, fashion professor types, and whenever they talk about Virginia, they say she was born into literary circles, and then like that was kind of like her circle of people when she was in New York, which makes sense because that's what her husband did for a living. Okay, in 1934, she got the Puff Bunny wardrobe published in Women's Home Companion. They did a 4-part series about that, and I think it was Interweave. It might have been Piecework, which they might even be owned by the same company. I'm not entirely sure. They so they did an article, like a big spread about that Puff Bunny wardrobe. I think there was 4 issues put out, and in each one of those issues in 34, Virginia's patterns were mentioned, and it was like adaptable children's wear, like ribbing and garter stitch and things that the kids could grow with. This was kind of the early days of the home economics movement. And if you're not familiar with that, like if you think about think about a kid in like the 1890s or the 1850s, like what were they wearing? It wasn't like stretchy. It wasn't anything they could put on themselves. It was like, corsets and laces and zippers. It was hard. And so in the 20s, the whole idea of like home economy and like dressing children for like to be kids, that they could like dress themselves and it's like comfortable clothes that they could play in, that was kind of a new idea. And so it was kind of a trend in the fashion and the home economy time frame back then. This was like the direction that things were heading, and Virginia was very much a part of that. And if you're interested in more about that, I need to add this link. There's a book called The Lost Art of Dress, and I think I've mentioned that before, but it really goes into a lot of detail about like the progression of American fashion design, like through the 1900 to 2000. It's a great book, and so I will put a link to that in the notes. Okay, so that was in 34. In 1942, I just learned this today, Virginia got a number knitting tutorial in Women's Home Companion. I did not know that before today, and the reason I found out is because of this great book. This is called The Hidden History of American Fashion, edited by Nancy Deal. Don't know if I pronounced that correctly. But okay, check this out. This is spectacular. I just came across this recently. And so this is Rediscovering 20th Century Women Designers. And I've only gotten through about 2 of them so far. Virginia is number 2 in here, and which I think is amazing. And I think there's a total of 16. I'm thinking probably most of the rest of them are going to be like couture fashion designers and people that made ready-mades and the entrepreneur types. But as far as I know, Virginia is the only one that was a knitter, and she was the only one that was a knitter, and she actually left us her patterns. Amazing, because I don't think that like all the other couture designers would put out their patterns in like a mail order form that we could recreate them from scratch. But Virginia did. She gave us her patterns, and she's the only one in this book that did. So, but in the bibliography, like each let me show you. Yeah, each section, like for each designer in this, it's like its own chapter, and so each chapter has got its own bibliography, which is great. And I was reading through this very carefully today, and this is where I found out that it was in 1942 that Virginia had a number knitting tutorial in Women's Home Companion, and that was news to me. Like, I thought Women's Home Companion was Puff Bunny wardrobe and McCall's was number knitting. I had no idea that she had a number knitting tutorial in Women's Home Companion. So what did I do? Bought it because that's what I do. But I add it to the collection. It was like $20, so it wasn't like, buying another hard copy of this. So that's exciting. Because in all the McCall's magazines, it's there's no tutorials. It's like a photo spread and then a description of like how awesome the technique is, but there are no tutorials in the McCall's magazines themselves. You'd have to like send off your 10 cents in a self-addressed stamped envelope, and then they would mail you the instructions. So the fact that she has a number knitting tutorial in Women's Home Companion in 42, that's very exciting to me. Okay, so she's still living in New York. She's still married to Rufus. In 1944, pamphlet number 1 for McCall's Needlework comes out. Let me see if I can. Oh, and here's something I just learned like 10 minutes before I started this show today. So this is so wild. I can't believe how there's just so much to find out. All right, let's take a look at this. 2. All right, so this is McCall's Needlework, summer 44, right? So World War II is still going on. Everyone, there's like fabric rationing and yarn rationing and everything rationing. And then over here, there's on page 68, it says, this is the road and wall design. This utterly lovely baby blanket or shawl is made in pink, blue, and white bands in the new number knitting. While the whole thing is plain knitting, the method of knitting in the continuous colored bands is very simple. The work starts in the center with a small block. The blanket can be made as large or as small as you please in any combinations of colors desired. And it continues over here. Perhaps you would like to make a throw for yourself in this design. This interesting road and wall design in Greek effect is worked around the center block in a series of binding off rows and picking up on other rows until the entire cover is finished. Knitters will be thrilled with this new discovery in knitting by Mrs. Virginia Woods Bellamy. Complete directions for this new number knitting in leaflet number 141 NB. See leaflet notes, page 64. So up until today, I thought this was advertising number knitting pamphlet number 1, but it's not. So this is the only place in any of the McCall's articles about number knitting that has a leaflet number 141 NB. All of the other ones, they say number knitting pamphlet number 1, 2, or 3, and number knitting is capitalized. And this one, number knitting, is lowercase, and it has a pamphlet number. And so it said that the instructions come with the, where is it? Also with the baby garments on page 10. So here's page 10. Leaflet directions for baby garments on this page. See leaflet number 141 NB. All right. I don't know if you can tell, none of this is number knitting. This is not. So this was the normal way that they did things. Some anonymous designer who didn't get any name credit, they designed this stuff and that was it, no name credit. And so at the very beginning, Virginia's, her first book, or her first pattern, the road and wall design, was like packaged together with this stuff and sold as a pamphlet. So this was in 40, this was 44 that she did this. So she's still living in New York. Yeah, still living in New York. Okay. So this is where it gets really, really interesting. Incidentally, Women's Home Companion was like a competitor to McCall's Needlework. McCall's Needlework was, they were based out of Dayton, Ohio. And incidentally, I found their old printing plant. It's, I think it shut down in like the 70s. And it's like, It was in disrepair and dilapidated. And I think just a few years ago, they calculated that thieves stole like $500,000 worth of copper out of it in just 1 year. So it's available for sale. It's on like 44 acres. The whole, like all the printing equipment is gone. I think the city of Dayton owns it now. Yeah, so it's like $300 million or something. So maybe we could crowdsource it. Anyway, that was in Dayton. So McCall's printing plant, it operated like 24/7 for decades. It published a whole bunch of different magazines, and McCall's Needlework was one of them. So McCall's Needlework and Women's Home Companion, they were like competitors. And at some point in time, I think it was around this time, she transitioned, as far as I know, to McCall's Needlework. Didn't have anything else in Women's Home Companion. Okay, so in 1945, two things happened. Virginia filed for her patent, and she got a divorce, which is really, that's hard. I mean, it was hard then, it's hard now. It's, let me show you the patent real quick. Yeah, there it is. 5. All right, so this is the patent. It's got the lambs and butterflies diagram on it. And if you follow the order of this, it says knit in order listed. And she, like, we're familiar with the numbered units. Like, that's how she did all the designs in numbered knitting. They're like all numbered units. But in this original one, she hadn't like started doing that whole numerical like numbered units thing. And so she's got like this bingo card here where you start in order listed. So you go 5F, you start here, and then you go 5E, and then you go 4E, and she just has you work around and around you go. And then she has a whole, those are this, I think at this time she only had 6 shapes. She added a 7th. I think it was the divided triangle she added later. But this patent is available on Google Patents. I highlighted it because I made some notes. But if you, now we know where she lived. Oh my gosh, I just found this. Okay, Virginia Woods Bellamy, Cold Spring Harbor, New York. That's new to me. All right. So she filed this in April 16th, 1945. And she actually got her patent delivered by Douglas Maynard, the mailman in Eliot, January 27th, 1948. And there was a blizzard that day. And we know that because that's what Virginia said in her book. There was a blizzard that day. He shook a blizzard off his shoulders and handed me the envelope from Washington. Okay, so 45. So Virginia was married in 1890, and in 1945, she got a divorce and moved to Eliot. So she's 55 at this point. I did the math on how old she was when she had her kids. So the two that she had left, Rufus was born in 28, so she would have been about 38. Jane was born in 31, so Virginia would have been about 41 at that point. And so when she moved to Eliot in 45, there's no mention of Rufus there at all. So I'm thinking Rufus stayed in New York. I did find some information where, like, by the time he was like, I don't know, 22 or 24 or something, he was already an English teacher at Amherst University. But in the book, Virginia mentions her daughter, Jane, going to Eliot High School, and she even mentions the teacher's name. Okay, so Virginia is 55. She's a newly divorced single mom with a 14-year-old teenage daughter, just moved into town. And I just think, like, holy cow, that's hard. That's really hard, because I've moved across the country and I'm married, and that's hard. But like doing it as a single mom, like, and she doesn't mention any family there. She says it's her grandfather's home state of Maine. I do know that when Virginia, this is another thing I found out today, when Virginia was 22, so it was 1912, her dad and her sister together started a church. And it was in, I think I even have it up here. Let's see, Woods, it's still there. It's called Woods Church. Let me find it, Woods Church. Yeah, this is wild. All right. And it is in Woods Memorial Presbyterian Church, like Virginia Woods Bellamy. So Woods was her maiden name. Her dad started this. This is amazing. Okay, so go to the history of this. This is 110 years old. It was founded by 8 organizing members in 1912. Our first pastor, Frank Churchill Woods, served the first 6 months without pay. Yeah, that's amazing. And so they started this church. Maybe his other daughter, Virginia's sister, was like one of the other organizing members. I'm not sure. Another thing that's interesting about this is that Frank Churchill Woods was her dad's name. And for years, I didn't know that Virginia had a daughter. Well, I didn't know that Virginia had a surviving daughter, because in the number knitting book, she refers to Jane Churchill Bellamy. And I was like, okay, well, maybe she's like a daughter-in-law. Like, who gives their girl a middle name of Churchill? Like, who does that? Virginia did, apparently. And now I know why, because that was her father's, that was like a family name. Yeah. Okay, so that was in, so Virginia wasn't from, we know she was probably born in Providence, Rhode Island. This church is located in Severna Park, Maryland. And so her family's in Maryland. She was born in Rhode Island, but her grandfather was from Maine. And so Virginia, 55 now, got a 14-year-old teenage daughter. She's a single mom. She moves back to Maine. And she says in the book, I moved to my grandfather's home state of Maine. But she doesn't indicate that she has any family there at all. So now she really gets to work on her publishing with McCall's. So in, let's see. All right. So spring summer 1946, she has another thing published about number knitting. And I've probably showed you this before. I need to find, I think this was number knitting pamphlet this was number 1, because we don't have a copy of this. We know that this is the mulberry bush blanket, and we know that this is called Hampton cardigan, and either this sweater or a copy of one from the same pattern was found at her son's estate sale in 2004, and it now lives with a collector somewhere that I can't get a hold of. I found that there was 20 of Virginia's garments, number knitted garments, at that estate sale in 2004. 20. And we have pictures of like 6 of them. Okay, so this is number knitting pamphlet number 1. This would have been in spring, summer 19, this is 46. Yeah. And I think there's another picture. Oh, it continues. It continues here. All right, so then if we go to fall, winter 1946-47, which, oh, here's number 1. All right, I just got this week. This is exciting. This one is really hard to find. Mine's not in the best of shape, but I've been on the hunt for this one for months. This is McCall's Needlework, 1945-1946. All right. I gasped when I saw this. Did I show you guys this last week? I don't know. All right, so This is advertising McCall's number knitting pamphlet number 1. And the reason I know that this is number 1, first because of the timeline, but also I paid the University of Chicago, Illinois because they have one copy. And I think it's the only copy in the world. And I paid them to scan it for me. So this is number knitting pamphlet number 1. And I have a copy of this. And so this was 1945, 1946. And then in 1946-47, the fall-winter issue, so it would have been like 1 full year later, there was number knitting pamphlet number 3. And I can't find that at the moment. It's probably in one of these drawers. But anyway, so like 44 to 47, she was like pretty active doing, with McCall's and getting her correspondence course going. And around that same time, she started, I think it was in 1950, she was advertising the correspondence course through Hand Weaver and Craftsman. But then from like 49 to 53, she's in all these newspaper articles. And I've got copies of all of those too. In one of the articles, it talks about, let me see if I can find it real quick. It talks about her, I think it was the Freeport Journal. Newspaper articles. Oh, here it is. This is the Portsmouth Herald. And this is interesting because I think this one was so this is 1952, like the time that her book came out. Sorry, my Photoshop is opening up. Come on, Photoshop. You can do it. I'll read it to you. She herself was born in Providence. Oh, there it is. I'll just scroll down so you can see the bottom part. Her grandfather was named Hiram Woods of Saco, Maine. Talks about where he traveled to and what he did. Mrs. Bellamy is his only descendant to return to Maine. Her father, I'm guessing, and a sister, started a new church to which members of all faiths gathered. Today it is known as the Woods Memorial Church in Severna Park, Maryland. So at some point between when they started it in 1912, they changed the name from whatever it started as to Woods Memorial Church. She herself was born in Providence, Rhode Island, and educated in New Jersey and Philadelphia. As a child, she wrote poetry. She has said had about 250 stories published in the Outlook and written operettas when her oldest child was a baby. A contributor to the New Yorker, just recently she was the recipient of a prize for poetry presented by the Pen and Brush Club of New York. She has 2 children, a son Rufus Bellamy, who is an instructor of English at Elmhurst College, and a daughter, Jane Churchill Bellamy, a senior at the University of Maine. I love that. So another thing that's interesting about this is that it mentions that her daughter is going to the University of Maine. And in one of these other articles, I'm not sure which one, but it mentions that she was doing a presentation at the University of Maine Home and Garden Week, and it was right in the same timeline. And this, as far as I know, I can't find any other mention of like any other universities that she spoke at, but it would kind of make sense because her daughter was a senior in college there, and so like mom went to speak at at the college, which is awesome. Like, of course, you know, if your mother is like, you know, nationally renowned knitting person, that you'd want them to teach at the college, of course. One thing I did forget to mention is that when she got to Eliot, she, you know, she's a single mom, she's 45, no, she's 55. She's 55 years old, single mom in Eliot, new to town, and there was a section, look at the link above Kelly. I'm going to need a little bit more information from you on that, Karen. So there was a section in the book where she talked about her, yeah, here it is. She talked about her daughter's English teacher, Mrs. Henry Obrey, teacher of English at Eliot High School, where my daughter was studying, asked her new pupil if she were related to a knitted wardrobe booklet by which Mrs. Obrey had dressed her children. And so this is in 40, this is at least in 48, because she got her patent in 48, and then right around the same time, the English teacher is asking her, oh, are you, you know, to her daughter, are you related to the one who did the knitting booklet? And so she would have published, by 48, she had published all 3 of her number knitting pamphlets, and she would have been pretty well known, which is great. Yeah, I love all of the research, and I think all this is important because, well, I like the idea of studying about her knitting, and you know, like the fact that her husband was an editor, like, and you know, that was like high society kind of stuff. That's all great, but I really want to know, like, I want to get a better understanding of like what it would have been like for a single mom to move from like Park Avenue, New York, with a teenage daughter to like Podunkville, Maine, because it was a really small town, really small. And it must have been really interesting. And another thing that kind of struck me about this is, like, she mentions in her book, Number Knitting, she mentions like dozens of people, from like the mailman to the school teacher to like the friends that worked at the museum to like all kinds of people. And those were her friends. And she never, as far as I know, she never lived anywhere outside of Maine after she moved to Maine. But in the whole book, like, there's no mention of like the publishing people that she had been associated with in New York. I think she did mention Martha Cobb Peabody, who was part of Women's Home Companion. I think she was the editor, because Women's Home Companion it was based out of Ohio, I think, but it also had offices in New York, and so Virginia lived in New York. And so she, you know, would have met her in person, but like I could be wrong, but it doesn't seem like there's any love lost for leaving the big city. Like, Eliot was her home, and she obviously had so much love for it. On that note, the Maine Historical Society sent me, gosh, this is great. They sent me a scan. They actually went into their warehouse and got this for me because I emailed them. They sent me these scans of correspondence between them and Virginia. So what they were doing is they were trying to build a collection of a whole bunch of books from Maine authors, and so they reached out to all the Maine authors that they could find, and they, you know, mailed them and said, we've ordered your book, you know, will you autograph it for us, like all that sort of thing. And it goes back and forth, and there's three letters that they sent to Virginia during 53, so it would have been right after the book was published, because the book was published, I believe it was in December 52. I might be wrong on the month, but I know it was in 52. And then also, This is really great. So this is a letter from one of Virginia's friends, Thea Wheelwright. It says, "We are sending you a copy of Virginia Bellamy's book under separate cover. Unfortunately, she died while we were trying to produce the book in time for her to see it." Now, they're not talking about number knitting. They're talking about her poetry book, which was published posthumously. She was born in Baltimore, I believe, in 1889 and died in January 1976. Her home address was at Castine, Maine. She had not published any books before, but many of her poems appeared in various literary magazines, and for some years, she ran a series of Stories for Life in Parade magazine. She was one of the most creative and lovable persons I ever knew. All good wishes, Thea Wheelwright. And that was in August of 77, and Virginia had passed January of 76. So this would have been about a year and a half later. So that's really great. And I've had this article thing for like, I don't know, 6 months or so. And I keep finding, as I keep rereading these historical documents, new details come to mind. So, did you catch that about Parade magazine? She had a series of stories in there, Parade magazine. So by the time, I don't know how long Parade magazine was in existence, by the time that I was old enough to get, in my coming up years, it was like junk mail in the back of the newspaper, and you just throw it away. It just seemed really dated. But for a long time, it wasn't. And it was like a really great magazine for a lot of generations. Parade magazine, I think it's only digital now, but the entity is still in existence. And so I emailed them today because if I try to do a Google search or like an archive search, I'm only going to find anything if it has been digitized and is in like public records. But if there's like boxes in a warehouse somewhere of old magazines that are not digitized, because all this was before computers, like we won't know unless we ask. And that's the only reason I have that stuff from the Maine Historical Society, was because I asked. And the only reason I found that is that they had actually listed. They have a PDF somewhere on their website, several pages long, of all of the authors whom they contacted asking for copies of books. So like the same kind of form letter that they sent to Virginia, they did that to lots of people, trying to get copies of their books for Maine Historical Society records. And so when I found that, I contacted them, and they're like, "Oh yeah, well, we got to go to the warehouse, but yeah, we'll get it for you." And they didn't charge me anything, which is awesome. So anyway, I'm reaching out to the Pathfinder. I just started looking at the Outlook. Like, I'm pretty sure it's totally defunct, 100 years ago. You still get Parade magazine? That's awesome. That is so awesome. Yeah, I haven't had a printed newspaper magazine in my entire adult life. So, yeah, I've gone all digital. And I don't even think I get the paper anymore. But that's so great. I did find, the only reason I knew to contact Parade magazine, because I found, I think it's a newspaper in Colorado called the Coloradan, and they said, I think this was like from a couple years ago, they had an article that said, starting now, you won't get printed copies of Parade magazine anymore. It was like this noteworthy announcement. It's only going to be digital if you have a subscription. And it had a link to somebody named, I don't know, Eric. And I was like, well, shoot, if he wrote the article, he'll know where I can find Parade magazine, because it said Parade will be exclusively available through the Coloradan. And I thought, maybe they own it. I don't know. And so I emailed him, and he's like, oh, you should contact the actual Parade magazine company and ask them. So I did, but it's Sunday. So we'll see. We'll see if they get back to me. Sometimes when I email people, it just like goes into a black hole. Like, I sent an email to the Meredith Corporation, who I believe, and I don't know if they're based in the US or Europe, but like they hold they hold the business end of this, I think. But I don't know if like the copyright was ever transferred, or like if McCall's Needlework was like part of what they bought, because I know they bought McCall's when like after Rosie O'Donnell had it and decided she didn't want it anymore, and so it's very murky. So I don't know if the Meredith Corporation owns McCall's Needlework magazine. I sure do know they're not that interested in getting back to me, so I might need to be a squeaky wheel on that one. Okay, one other really cool thing I found about Virginia. This is great. I found the census records. Okay, I haven't been able to track down 1940 yet because I didn't know where to look. I knew that in 45 she moved to Eliot, Maine, and so I went down the rabbit hole and I found Eliot, Maine 1950 census records, which was thrilling. And she lived on River Road. It says serial number of dwelling unit. I don't think this is a house number, because I don't think there were house numbers on Eliot Road back then. It's a serial number, so maybe it's like a city internal. Maybe it's like I don't know what a serial number of dwelling unit is. And this was dictated. Like you see, it's all in the same handwriting. So maybe the people went like door to door and they dictated their responses to whoever was taking the census. I think that's how they did it. So she was, Bellamy, Virginia W. She is 1 at this point, and 1 is white. And in this column, she is female. On her last birthday, she was 60, and she is item number 3. She is, it's hard to tell. I think divorced is item number 3, according to that schema here. I don't know what column 15 means. She was working. She worked 44 hours a week, and she was a designer and writer and had her own business. There we go. So now that I know that she lived in Cobb Falls, or I don't know, I have to look at the patent again and see where it was, like where she said that she lived when she was on the patent. I'm going to go and dig around for those census records next. Yeah, so that's exciting. She passed in just January 31st, 1976. Yes. She had a long and fruitful life, and so I want to find out like more about her early years, like the 20s, from like, by the time she was like 20 years old to like, so I guess that would have been like 1910 to like 1930, like what was going on in those years, and also like what happened post 1953, because from 53, the last recorded thing that we have is she lectured at the University of Maine's Farm and Home Week. And then there's nothing else that I could find right now until she passed and had her book published. Like I think it was both happened in 1976, and so there's like this 20-ish year gap that I would very much like to fill in the blanks on. Fill in the blanks, fill in the holes. So I'm going to keep working on that. All right. So that's my research. That's my research this week. Oh, I did want to show you. I highly recommend this book. If you're into the historical, this book is not a knitting book. I've talked about this a little bit earlier, The Hidden History of American Fashion. It's not about knitting. It is about what it says it's about, American fashion history. And if you're like the scholarly type, because this was written, I think probably most of the writers who did this are probably like fashion historians, I'm guessing. I haven't read all the bios on these people, like Jean Parsons, Sarah McCready, Michael Mamp. Like, I don't know who those people are. I do know that these two are fashion historians. So these are the only ones I'm familiar with. But like, if you like the scholarly type of research about social history, I highly recommend that you get this. It's tremendous. It's also available as a Kindle version, and it was produced I think it was produced like 5 years ago, and so it's it's going to be pretty well done as far as the Kindle version. But it does have some items from the number knitting book, and it's got this is one of those pictures I think that was like from the piecework article, one of the extant garments, and a chart. This is from the To the Adventurous Knitter section of the book. But this has so much great stuff about Virginia, and also how she like fits into the whole mid-century craft movement. It's kind of in the same. It's a similar vein to the Dr. Lily Marsh PhD thesis about Elizabeth Zimmerman and the emergence of, I think it was American handcraft, and how that kind of fits, like how knitting fits into handcraft, and it's scholarly, and it's just a great read. So I'm going to put that in my notes. Again, a link to Dr. Lily's dissertation, which is tremendous. I have tried to find some descendants that are still alive, but I don't want to get too pushy because Jane, Virginia's daughter, is like in her 90s, and I do know of them, and for years I didn't know about them. Like I didn't know, but yeah, they are out there, and I know who they are, and I know like where they live and like the town and all that. Interestingly, if you go into the number knitting group on Ravelry, there's a post in there. I think it's in the Have You Heard of This Book thread. Her grandson actually posted in there, and he has wonderful things to say about his grandma and how I think they call her Nanya, and he has tremendous memories of her knitting on the sofa, and she was just lovable and wonderful. So they are aware of the Ravelry group, and I know who they are. But I'm gonna let them talk to me if they want to, and I don't want to get pushy. But they seem like a lovely family, and of course, like it makes sense. Virginia, like I never knew her, but like we have her book, and we have all the articles that people wrote about her, and like she loved people so much, and it because of all of the dozens of people in her town that she mentions by name and gave name credit to all of her fellow knitters and her students, and she loved people. So of course it would make sense that she has an amazing family, of course. So hopefully I'll get to meet them one day, but we're just gonna take it as it comes. Yes. All right, so let's talk about the knit-along. We've been seeing some really good progress in the Ravelry group. There's a few folks that have posted their garments, which is great. I'm going to bring up the pattern in the Hampton shirt in the book. Here we go. All right, so we are doing the Hampton shirt, and this is the one from the original book. And if you're new here, please know that this book has a mistake. It's an awesome book, but there's a mistake in it. This says chest measurement 42, and box number is 4 stitches and 4 ridges. And you cast on 16 and 16, okay? But if you look at this chart, it's written on 3 by 3. And so if you knit to a box number of 4, according to this chart, you will get a sweater that fits a 36-inch bust, which is what I did. And it fits great. And it wasn't until the second time I made this that I I even caught the error. Let me show you this sweater real quick. All right, so this is the Hampton shirt. It's like a vest in the original book. Let me show you that real quick. So the original book is like, it's for a guy, and it's you know, it's kind of like pulled down over his tie, and it's reversible. It's front and back. And in the original book, it doesn't have any gauge shifting. It uses a single size of needles. And so when I made mine, I did exactly that. I made it just like the book. And it's, you know, it's a little vest, and it's, there's no like cutout for the neckline or anything. And it's cute. It's even using vintage yarn that I got from my grandmother. It's probably from, I don't know, the 70s, I'm guessing, based on the rust-colored speckles in here. But Virginia does say in here, where is it? Yeah, this adaptable pattern for the slip-on sweater for a man may be applied to a child's shirt or woman's blouse, to an open cardigan, front bordered and with sleeves, or open necked, slip-on, long or short sleeves. And so you can make this however you want. We have some people that did a long sleeve. Oh. A long sleeve version. I made a baby version not too long ago, which was a hit at the baby shower. So, all right, I have a confession to make about baby showers. Baby showers kind of freak me out. It's generally uncomfortable for me. But when I go, I bring a handmade gift. And generally speaking, the handmade gift that I bring is the only handmade gift at the baby shower, which makes it less uncomfortable for me. So anyway, that is true for this baby shower that I just went to yesterday, and it was the only handmade gift, and she loved it. So yay! Number knitting for the win. All right, let's take a look at this. So this is the Hampton sweater that I'm working on. And even though I made a new calculator for this, I was tired when I did the calculator. And I think I have a calculator linked down below. I was tired and I messed up the math. So this is significantly, I don't have a tape measure. It's smaller than it normally, than it probably should be. But you know, it fits skin tight, which I don't mind. I think I'm going to use it as like a base layer for like when I go skiing. It looks good. Yeah, so what I did for mine, because this is like the basic sweater from the book. What the changes I made were, I had this open section here, because in the original book it was, you know, it was tight, but mine is got a little open front. And then I also added these sleeves, and I added a gusset. And based on my experience with other projects from the book, like normally Virginia says you just keep the stitch count the same and just change needle size. And I've done that on sweaters. But it's not quite sufficient. It makes like a bell sleeve. And so if you're into bell sleeves or like really wide sleeves or like with cufflinks or something, it's great. But like I like things more tapered. And so instead of because this is 16, each one of these squares is 16 by 16 inches. No, that would be really big. 16 by 16 stitches. And so what I did here, I did, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, there's six rows of squares. So I did 15 square and 15 stitches, 14, 13, 12, 11, and 10. And that seems to work pretty great. It fits well and it tapers nicely. Now, if your math is different, and undoubtedly your math is going to be different because, well, you probably did your math right, and you're going to have a different gauge and you're going to have a different, measurement that you're trying to reach. So if your measurement is different, you're probably not going to want to just decrease 1 stitch per square. You might go like, you know, if your box number is like 27, you might go like, I don't know, 25, 22, 16, you know, you're going to taper down in like larger increments. Now, when you use your stitch calculator for this, the stitch calculator is on the KnitSwag website. So go to knitswag.com, click on blog. It's the first one down. It's called Diamond Design Man's Sweater. Let me bring it up real quick. What I did is, there it is. Yeah. So what I did is you plug in your measurement. So like if I was to actually do this without screwing it up, I have a 36-inch bust. Tab doesn't work. You have to press return. And let's say my stitches are like, I'm going to eyeball it. Let's say 5 stitches to the inch. 5 stitches to the inch. My box number should have been 23. Should have been. But I was tired, so my box number is 16. And I still like it. I still like it. I think it's because it's a thin yarn. Like if it was a thick yarn, I don't know that I'd really like it. Like a worsted weight, I think it would be too much. But this is like a light fingering. It's super soft alpaca. It's hands fun. Yeah. So let me show you some of the other adaptations that some of our other number knitters have done. Let's see, let me get that up real quick. I know Anita showed me, she did one, she added a nice, here it is, a really nice touch. Didn't that turn out great? Spectacular. And this is like some hand spun wool. So she did these little like I-cord things, like little I-cord knots, which is cute. Love it, fits great. I think that's one of the things I like the best about number knitted garments is that they don't make you look like you're wearing a paper bag. So the original, oh my gosh, love that detail. The original pattern didn't call for gauge shifting, but like if you wanted to, you could do, you know, like bigger needles up here at the top and then go down like a size and then go down another size and then like go up again one. So you keep your stitch count the same, but you just change the needle size and it has this really subtle shaping. Okay, so here's what's really cool that Anita did is she added, so like this is the back and this is the front, right? And so she added these little wedges right there, which I think it just makes for a really nice fit. So I think I'm going to do the same thing on mine. Because if you think about it, like if you have the, if this is just a, if that was closed, you'd have a neck opening of about maybe 16 inches, right? So you got your neck opening. But because this part is open here, the neck opening is now like, I don't know, 20 inches. It's much bigger. And so it could look a little floppy. And so what she did, she added just like these little wedges in there to kind of like make that just tighten up just a touch around the neck because you don't need all that extra space because you've got like all this room here to work with. So I'm going to do the same thing on mine, which is, yeah, I'm excited about that. And also one of the others, I think it was Mishibi. She's making this sweater for a friend who's like miniature. She's, I don't know how tall, very, very short, but she's only like 80 pounds. And she's just this little itty bitty, like little pixie thing. And she was worried about like the proportions being, like the sleeves being too deep. And so if you're concerned about your sleeves being like too deep, here's some suggestions for you. So take your favorite shirt or your friend's favorite shirt that they love the most, in probably like a similar weight of fabric as what you're going to be knitting for them. Because, you know, a thinner fabric, you can get away with like things being tighter. A thicker fabric, you're going to want things looser, deeper armholes, that sort of thing. So what you're going to do is you're going to measure the armhole depth of your favorite shirt. And also, that's probably, you know, going to be about the same measurement here around your sleeve, around like your bicep area. Now, to get just a little bit extra room here in the underarm, what you can do is add a gusset. And in one of my early sweaters, what I did is, because that's what the pattern said, I added a full gusset. And so what that did is it took an 8-inch sleeve depth and it turned it into like 12-inch sleeve depth, and it made it look like a potato sack. But I do think a gusset is important. It deepens the sleeve depth just a touch to make the armhole a bit, can you see that? That's a little bit better. To make the armhole a bit deeper, but it's not gonna make it look too baggy. And so what I would recommend is, oh, she says she's 4'8". She's Japanese. So small. My shortest friend is 4'10", and she makes me feel like a giant. I don't have any 4'8" friends, but you know, I think I'd like to. I would very much like to have a 4'8" friend. Okay, so regarding the gusset, when I did my copper cardigan, I did the gusset like as I was knitting the sleeve. And I'm thinking it's a better idea, do your gusset later, because if you change your mind, you can just go back and like take out this little gusset here and like make it bigger, make it smaller, and you don't have to like cut into any of this knitting and like freak out that it might unravel. So I would do the gusset last. Another thing I learned on this is that I would also seam it later, like wait until it's like what Anita did, which is a great idea. Let me show you hers again. This is how you should do it. Do it flat. And then once it's like the whole thing is done, then you can add your sleeves. Again, keep the whole thing flat, and then you can seam the whole thing up later. Do the seaming later. And the reason I say that is because when I was out, I was knitting on this, and you know, I like to do, you know, you have to cast on for like here, for example, you have to pick up here. If I'm working in the store, you pick up here and then cast on there. Well, I didn't have a crochet hook with me. And I was like, well, shoot, I'll just fold the whole sweater in half and I'll pick up from that side. And so like, but none of the other seams were in yet. And so it was like the whole sweater was connected just at this one point. And it was awkward. It was really awkward. And so I would just recommend like do the whole thing open and flat, and then do your gussets. Like fold it in half, do your gussets, and then seam it. Like do the seaming last, because it'll just be, it's better that way. And how do I know? Because I know the wrong way to do it now from experience. Yeah, so this is coming along good. I still have one more sleeve to go. I think I'm going to add some ribbing along the bottom. Not entirely sure. I think I'm going to do what Anita did. She said it was, those are knots, I-cord looped, tied into a knot. I love that. I love that very much. So I'm going to do that because it's a great idea. I think I'm also going to do like I-cord around the cuffs. I used to do knitted cuffs, but then I always felt myself pulling my sleeves up, and then I worry about it like stretching out. And then I discovered my favorite sweatshirt that I wear every day. It's got my company logo on it, and so it's like my work sweatshirt. So it has like a little it has like an I-cord. I mean, it's polyester. It's, you know, it's like a fleecy kind of fabric, but it's not ribbed. It's like a little bit loose, and it's got like this little cord around it, and I like that very much for sweaters because it's just a little bit looser, and I can like pull it up if I need to, like, you know, wash my hands or wash the dishes or something. I'm not worried about stretching it out. So that's what I'm going to do. I don't know that I showed you, if you're new here, let me show you the new chart that I designed for this, because the calculator that I made, Hampton shirt, there we go. The calculator that I made will not work with the chart in the book, because the chart in the book, it doesn't match the instructions. It's just confusing, and it only comes in one size. So what I did is I made this, I made a new chart that makes more sense. I added little gussets on mine. But instead of, in Virginia's pattern, the box number was 4. I made the box number to be like whatever the whole stitch count of the square is. And so in my case, my box number is 16. Yours might be 27. Use the calculator on the KnitSwag blog to determine your box number, and that's how many stitches you need to cast on for each one of these squares. And I do have some instructions on here about like how you can tailor the fit, like if you want it more, a little bit more room in the bust and a little bit more tapered in the waist, you can just change needle sizes, and it works awesome. It works awesome. These things, because the knitting runs in multiple directions, they totally stretch to fit, and they're super flattering. I know a lot of people today like the boxy fit, but I don't like boxy fit sweaters. Like I don't want to wear a sack. I don't want to wear something oversized. I want it to look good, and these sweaters do look good. Okay, next up, how are we doing on time? Oh, 7:21. Wrap it up, girl. All right, the other knit along that, and I think I'm the only one doing this knit along. That's okay. That is okay. Oh man, this is so fun. I just got my new, I ran out of yarn because like, that's what I do. I run out of yarn on projects, and I just got it in the mail today, so I haven't had a chance to like wind it up and start working with it. All right, let's take a look at this. This one is called bodice. How does this go? There we go. All right, this is called bodice blouse with cape scarves. One of my cameras died, so I can't zoom out because that camera's dead for some reason. But anyway, so this one, the pattern was intimidating. She says it's easier to knit on the needles, even though the pattern is like kind of scary looking. And I suppose it is, but it's still kind of a mind bender. So it's a 2-part. This is the back, and then you got, this cute little gusset, and you got this like big, this big poofy sleeve. It's so poofy. This is on size 13, size 13 needles. I'm going to show you this pattern as well. Bodice blouse. There we go. So this is the bodice blouse with cape scarf. And when I redrew the chart for this one, I did color coding for the needle sizes so that you know what size to use. And this has two pages of charts, and I'm like halfway through with one page. So one thing that's interesting in all this historical research I've been doing about Virginia, and the people that like to write about her, there's something that every single one of them has missed without exception, and it's amazing to me. No one anywhere that I've seen has talked about her gauge shifting. They talk about her units, her like modular shapes. They talk about her patent. They talk about her husband. They talk about her poetry. They talk about like, her kids, like where she lived. No one talks about her gauge shifting at all. And I gotta think that maybe that's because they've never knit through the book. Well, I know they've never knit through the book, but like, the one pattern that I have seen published of of Virginia's, like after the fact, in an Interweave magazine article, I think, or maybe it was Piecework. It, like, maybe there was two, but neither one of them used the gauge shifting. They just chose like a shawl or a stole, like one needle size. And the absolute genius of Virginia is that she used multiple needle sizes with the same yarn. And so it wasn't like she didn't feel encumbered at all by using 6 different sizes of needles in one pattern. And it's amazing. And so, yeah, you gotta try it. If you try anything from the number knitting book, I know the shawls are easy and they're flat. Try the Hampton sweater. We got the knit along going on. I think through the end of June, and we're gonna have prizes. And just like our last knit along, the chances that you win is going to be pretty high because there's not very many people knitting with us. But try the Hampton sweater. The new chart is available for free. And try out some different needle sizes. And it's tremendous. It's tremendous. Join us for the gauge shifting. You will love it. Okay, so it's almost 7:30. Almost time to wrap up. With all of the info dump that I did on you all today, did you have any questions or comments, or tell me how your number knitting is coming along? I want to hear about your projects. So while I wait for the feed to catch up, I'm spinning up some more yarn to fill out the neckline on my linen blouse that kept falling off the shoulder. So I should have some of that ready here in the next couple of weeks to wrap that up, and so it'll be a little bit better fit. Yeah, and also I'm going to be showing off the. I still have one more thing to make, and this bodice blouse, it's got a cape scarf, and so I'm going to make 2 of these in addition to finishing this sweater. I'm hoping I can get both of them done by the end of June. This one is pretty small compared to the sweater. The sleeves are just ginormous, but so this is coming. This is like up next in the queue. Yeah. Alrighty, friends. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you for the encouragement. I'm having a lot of fun. I'm learning so much. And I've even done more research than I've even told you about. But it's like I'm still waiting to hear back from some folks. So when I get more information, I will definitely share it here. And also, if you haven't subscribed, please do. I know I'm not like real great on social media with like pushing, the channel and all that. And some weeks my subscriber count will go up by like 4, but this week it dropped by several. So it's like on the downward trend now. Anita says, the number knitting pamphlet you talked about finding, do you put it so we can see it? I want to. So originally, the people that I had gotten that pamphlet from at the University of Chicago, they're like, I was like, oh, it's probably in the public domain. And they're like, no. Like, wow. So I need to do a copyright transfer search on that first to like get in touch with the copyright office and find out, like, did anyone ever renew any of this copyright information from McCall's? My guess is probably no, but like, I don't know. I don't have enough time in my schedule to learn how to do copyright research. So pretty soon, originally I said I was going to do it because it's $400. I was going to do it when I reached 1,000 subscribers, but thinking that might be like in a few years. So, like, how about when I get to 500 subscribers? Then I'll do it. I'll put out I'll put out the $400 to, you know, do the copyright transfer search, pay the $400 and figure out like if we can start sharing this stuff. I want to so bad. I just haven't done it yet. And also at that same time, I'm going to get the scanner because I'm accumulating all these magazines and my intention is to digitize them and make them available because they're not. Like you have to, you know, maybe you could find one in a book, like a one page from a magazine or something, but like there's a few McCall's Needlework magazines on the web archives. I don't know how they got up there since, like, I don't know if they're in the public domain, but they're like all from the 80s and they're in black and white. And the ones from the 80s are super cheesy. So anyway, I want to digitize all these things, make them available, like save history. I have to check the copyright transfer yet. I was talking with someone on Instagram, I forget her Instagram name, Knitting Traditions maybe? I'm not sure, but she's like this 1940s knitting historian person based out of the UK. And I will put a link to her in the show notes once I remember what her Instagram name is. But she was telling me about in the UK, they have different copyright rules. And she said that you have to, if the designer was named in the publication, if the designer was not named in the publication of the pattern, which was like pretty much everything in the 40s and 50s, except for Virginia, the publication had to be at least 70 years old and it had to be out of like copyright in the public domain. And how one is supposed to determine that, like, and they leave it all up to the people. Like they don't have like a copyright research office in the government like we do to just, you can't just like write them a check and have them do the research. Like you have to do it all yourself. And so like, that's crazy. Like how would you even go about doing that? Finding copyright information for companies that went out of business like 80 years ago. Like, I don't know. It's crazy. So maybe the whole idea of spending $400 for the Copyright Office to do a copyright transfer search is like not that big of a deal. She was pretty excited for me when I told her like the system that we have here in the States. Yeah, so that's pretty great. Yeah, so that's the plan. I just, you know, I gotta like keep my ducks in a row. I did when I digitized number knitting, and before I put the ebook up for sale, like a couple of years before, I did the copyright transfer search and I paid them $400 to just let me know, because my original intention was just to like redo the charts and press print and, you know, make a new one. And it turned out to be way more involved than I thought it would be. And like with no end in sight. And so that's why I decided to do the ebook. But I did the copyright transfer search for number knitting, but that was just a single publication for $400. And so I'm like, I don't know if the $400 for researching McCall's would be like per issue or like for the whole company's existence. Like, I don't know. And so I need to do a little bit more research into that. I do not own the copyright. Oh, Mishi B says, Knitting Guild in the UK has an extensive library. If you're a member, you can borrow stuff. I learned about this from Roxanne Richardson. Very cool. I also did some research into the UK Free Library, and anything in their collection, they'll scan it for you on a per page count. And I did the math, because they're like, oh yeah, we have number knitting, it's listed in a WorldCat, it's in their collection, they'll scan it for you. But it's like $600 for them to scan it for you. Yeah, so my ebook is cheaper and it's available now. Yeah, so Knitting Guild in the UK, that's really great to know. As far as do I own the copyright? No, nobody owns the copyright. Not technically, it's in the public domain. But the issue is that there's so few copies in existence, and it's like such a rare book. Like, to get your hands on one, if you can, is really hard. Like, they come available on like ebook or eBay sometimes, or Amazon, but they're like, I don't know, $300, $400, which is expensive. And I do know that the the web archives that have, they do like archive.org, they do a lot of scanning and digitization of like, old magazines and old books and stuff. But it seems like it's for stuff that's got like a higher number of printed copies available. Like there's probably not a huge pressing number of people that are like trying to get that particular book. Because, and then like they'd have to get a copy of it to scan it. And that's hard and expensive. I mean, maybe if you're not the web archives, it's probably not expensive, but like, they have to prioritize things. There's like, probably teams of volunteers that they have to, task to do certain projects. And 1952 knitting book is probably not real high on the priority. But no, I don't own the copyright. I did take all the time to money to buy my own copy and get the copyright transfer search and like, scan the whole thing and redo all the charts and like knitting them all. Like I've done a lot of work. I do not own the copyright on the book. I did talk with a couple of attorneys, and one of them said that like the extra things that I've added to it, like the bookmarks and the cross references and colorizing all the photos, that's sort of like kind of on the edge, like that those improvements could sort of be covered under copyright. But I don't know the process for that, and I don't know. So for now, I'm just doing the ebook the way it is, and I'm pretty happy with just having like another group of like-minded knitters to go through it with me. So it's more of like a academic, educational pursuit than it's definitely not profitable. Let me tell you that. definitely not in its current form. It costs money. Like Virginia had the same experience. It cost me far more than I ever brought in. Like, yes, I understand that very much. So yeah, this has been super fun. 7:37. So I'm gonna go through my notes. I got a few links to add to the show notes. I'll probably do that tomorrow. But next week I am gonna be out of town. I'm going to be visiting family. And so I'm going to be taking next Sunday off because I won't be here. And I'll be visiting family. So we will pick it up again the following, I guess, 2 weeks from now. And by then, I will probably have my Hampton sweater finished, and I will have made really good progress on the bodice blouse. And so I can show you those things. And maybe some of the historical magazine people that I've been emailing, maybe they will have gotten back to me by then, hopefully. So I'll have more historical type stuff to share with you. Mishi B says the ebook is great. I just wish that Adobe on my iPad was more friendly. Preach. I hear ya. I agree. All of that, I agree. Desktop version is better than the iPad version. But what you can do, I use it on my phone, the ebook version on my phone. It's still searchable. Like you can, click on the little magnifying glass and do keyword search and all that. And it's, it's just small, but it's still totally searchable. So I still reference mine like every day. Even though I have the hard copy, I use the ebook actually a lot more than the hard copy. So yeah. All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate you. And this is the highlight of my week. I love it. I love knitting and having knitting friends. And you're great. So be sure to post your projects in the Ravelry group or on Instagram or like message me, send me pics, whatever. I love it. And I will see you in 2 weeks, my friends. All right. Take care.